we started off these sessions kind of doing a very entry or intro level about development. So even like setting up your first project. And then the last couple sessions got pretty complex with interfaces as well as different aspects and diving into even responsive web design. I am doing a weekend workshop through the Columbus Web Group. I did announce that a couple weeks back, and tickets are going to be available tomorrow. You both are more than welcome to attend, and it's actually going to be an online class, but it's still limited to 10 people per class. But that's all about building out grids as well as structures around content. So with everything that we kind of covered up to now, it's pretty much like jamming that in, but instead of it being like intro to development, it kind of starts off with a knowledge and some prerequisites of CSS and HTML, and kind of gets into more of like the lessons that we'll be covering today as like the starting point, and then building off of it. So I think it would be a good way to continue the education on this. In addition, I'm going to be doing more and more weekly just videos of things that I'm working on, that I'm recording. So projects that I'm just building out, and then I'll be sharing. I do have my open source project that I have actually released some pieces of it out there on my GitHub, and more of it will be released here soon. But it's my UI library here. Let's go here. So it's going to be this piece. And if I were to show you what this looks like right now, it doesn't look that exciting or that cool, but basically it's this UI architecture, and it's based off of inverted triangle or ITCSS, the methodology that Harry Roberts came up with, so CSS wizardry, and some of the pieces and parts that he did. So this methodology right here, as well as like BAM, object-oriented CSS, and organizational things. So there's all this documentation that's built in here, and then I outline like how to use all the mix-ins and pieces and parts that I have inside here. So it has become kind of a full-fledged UI library. The idea here that is a screenless or a styleless UI library, but that's something that I've been working on, and I'll have future videos that, of course, like I would like to share with you guys, and anything moving forward, always hit me up with. But today, what I really wanted to cover and kind of finish on this really last session that we have here. First, I'll just kind of make myself a note here. We're going to revisit positioning. And then we're going to revisit just making a nice little structure. But before we get into that, we'll revisit a grid really, really quick. And that's going to be the display types. And then we'll build out a quick little navigation. Actually, you know what? Instead of building out navigation, what we'll do is we'll build out the Facebook, a Facebook kind of post. And then that'll kind of hit on everything, because we did the navigation last time. Does that sound cool?
Yeah, let's get to it.
All right, cool. So, this is my CSS here. Again, one of the things that I like to start off with is the star before and star after. So these are the pseudo classes of the star selector. Star selector means that it's on every single thing. So if I do something like this, put this here, and I put another one here, and I put a span in, a span in here, and I put this. And this star means if I put outline 1 pixel solid blue, you will see every single thing outlined with blue. So every element gets it. So what I like to do is I like to do this reset, or it's normalize of box sizing, border box. And what this guy actually gets me to overcome is that piece that we covered in previous sessions of box sizing. So if I have this div here and I say this is 700 pixels, right? And let's give it a class. So I'm adding a class attribute. It's going to be called demo-1. For this to be a class, I have to have that period, dot whatever that name is. So whatever is inside this class attribute goes right here. And if it's a class, it starts with a period or a dot in front of it. And then we have the curly brackets, and then we put our CSS properties inside here. So we have our keys and our values. The one that I'm going to be using here is I'm going to say width as my key, and my value is going to be 700 pixels. Also, to kind of highlight this, I'm going to just do something like this. I'm going to say anything that's a class that contains demo dash. We're going to say outline 1 pixel. Oops. Solid. So you'll see that this is outlined 1 pixel. And if I inspect this guy right here, it will say it is 700 pixels as expected. So how I got to this is just the Chrome developer tools. I right-clicked on here and I went to inspect. You can also hit Command-Shift-C, I believe. Yeah, Command-Shift-C on OS X. I can go through all the DOM, or I can just like highlight the piece here. Now if I go to inspect and I look at computed here, it will say 700 pixels, but you'll also notice this padding, border, and margin around here. So for this demo guy, he is 700 and it says 700 inside here. Now let's do another demo next to it and we'll say demo 2. And I'm just going to copy this. And we're also going to give them, I'm going to share this class, this property for both of these guys. So just for the time being. So again, if I have multiple classes that are sharing a CSS property or CSS value or property, I can separate them with commas, so I can have as many as I want. There's actually a cap on it. I forget how many. I want to say it's in the 500s or something like that. There's also a cap on how long your CSS file can be. That rarely happens unless you are working in SharePoint. One of the pieces of SharePoint is called core.css. Core.css actually goes over can go over the maximum amount of CSS loading, which causes a timeout and it doesn't load it, or only like half of it will load at times. It's great development by the folks at Microsoft. So here, these are both 700 pixels. Another thing I'm going to do here is, so this is a attribute star selector. So what this is saying is any selector, or this is my selector, and it says any element that has a class that contains demo dash gets this. If I were to drop this E here and said demo, that would not be applied, or not would not be the selector for this, but this is selecting this guy, so it's getting applied here. So another thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to say, I'm going to use my favorite setup here, excuse me, and I say this plus this, and I'm going to say a margin top of 20 pixels. So it's going to separate those two out so they're not right there. Another thing here, I'm also going to say a margin left auto, and I'm going to say a margin right auto, which will center it in the page at 700 pixels. So that's how you properly center. And yeah, so this is a good little start here. For demo 2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add padding of 40 pixels. So you can see that this guy has moved in here because the padding is right there, and this guy does not have it because I've only applied it to demo 2, which is this selector for this this element here. If I right click on this and I say, all right, what's demo 2, and we looked here again at the computed, you'll notice that the padding is right here. But something you'll notice is that this is 620. How that is 620 is this outer width of this that was defined was 700 pixels, and it's subtracting the 40 pixels on the inside. The reason why this is happening is because we're using border box. If we get rid of this, what's going to happen is this guy is going to remain 700 on the inner parts of it, and it is going to push the content outwards. So it's adding that 80 pixels on the outside of it, where this now becomes 780 pixels. So what border box allows me to do is to create a reset across my entire project, where you have consistency from one element to another, and it allows me to add the flexibility of something like a helper class, like a padding, without having to worry about the overflow of the width. This is also really helpful when it comes to percentages and anything like that. So if we said something like this, 50% and 50% as just random text inside there, and I said 50%, you can see that this is 50% plus 40. And that's where, you know, the argument for like why use border box versus content box, which is the default, has come into play. WebKit by default does not render it as a border box. As you can see that I need to do this box sizing border box. So now that I have this here, they're the same width. So if you're starting a project from scratch, do this. I recommend it, or make sure you have that conversation with your development team. If you are coming in a project that is legacy, that has been around, this could be a very horrible thing to add to your CSS, and could break your website. Let's think of a really bad website, or not a really bad website, but a website that's out of date. Trying to think of one that is kind of funny that would break it. I don't know. I don't want to call it a website, but basically, do you guys understand what border or box sizing border box is doing? I know I'm talking a mile a minute. I've had a lot of caffeine today.
Yeah, it's just like applying it to the inside versus the outside, right?
Yep. Well, it's the way that you're looking at the container and where the padding is getting applied to it, whether it's pushing it out or pushing the content inside. So it's whether the borders are outside or inside the content. It's the measurement of the content with itself or the exterior outside of it. So why this is important, this is a good way to start off a project. We have this, fantastic. Let's get rid of all this. That was just for purposes of conversation. I'm going to create something that's, I'm going to call it O container. And O container is going to be a max width of 700 pixels. And on the side, we're going to do that margin left, auto, and margin right, auto. And inside here, I'm going to do O container. And this is going to be my content. So I'm just going to do all right, so we have this container. It has max width of 700 pixels. Another thing I'm going to do is, again, if I look at the CSS here and inspect, so again, this is kind of, it's a little bit maybe confusing to look at CodePen in the code because it's an iframe, and an iframe is just a window of another project inside of it. But if I look at inside this iframe, it has this HTML, which is the root HTML, or the root of the DOM. Inside here, you can see some styles that are associated with it. But I'm going to go to body, and off to the side you'll see user agent style sheet, and this is something that we covered in the very first lesson that we had. By default, these are the definition of how an element gets CSS applied to it by default. Probably the most common and one that people get confused about is if I put a header in here and I put something like this. You'll notice that this has a default size on it, and if I were to do something like this, you can see that this is bigger and this is smaller. Why is that? Is because in the user agent in H1 is defined as 2ems, which is the multiplier of the root font by 2. So this would calculate as 32 pixels. It also has this margin before and after of 0.6 ems, so just a little bit above about 9 pixels that's being calculated there. And then the H2 also has something similar here. But these are by default defined by the browser. We had talked about inheritance and specificity previously. If I were to do something like this and say body, and say color is red, and I say font family is a sans serif, you will see stylistically that these inherit, but it's not just inheriting it down, it's also inheriting the styles inside here. So if I look inside this container and I look at what this P tag is, which is the paragraph tag, you can see that it says inherited from body and has a color red and a sans serif. If I look at this, which is the user agent, it doesn't have those defined, so we're extending the paragraph tag which is always the goal of CSS. And then inside here, it is inheriting these styles, which is cool that that happens. And that's a good way to have your styles kind of cascade in. And something like, a wrong way of doing this would be like if I said, I want all my H1s and H2s and paragraph tags to be sans serif doing this. Even though that gives me the same result, it doesn't give me as much flexibility in my design and the ability to override. So there's that. So when you're doing CSS, inheriting is really important to know and understanding where it's coming from. Chrome does a really great job of also doing this. So I can go to computed and I can see all these styles that are being applied to it by default. So the ones that are being defined from my browser. I can also do show all, which is going to give a breakdown of anything potential that is associated to that element and the stylings, whether or not I've defined them myself. I can click on any of these that have been defined and click on this and it will tell me where it got defined from, which is really cool. If it's something that is default by the browser and I go this, it will actually take me to the user agent. So if you see something styling weird and you're like, where did that come from? A lot of these elements, like, you get used to the proper use and the right one to use at the right time. But until you do that, having that little trick of going to computed and understanding user agent is really, really important. Again, user agent is just the definition of the CSS properties by default to the element or HTML tag that has been defined by the original spec of it. So all those you can look up online if you're ever wondering, like, which attributes are actually there, which styles come default, and different things. When you're doing a reset, like I said earlier with the border box, this is a normalized. A reset is something like this. So for all my H1s, or for all my headers, I'm going to do a reset. And a reset means that I'm not trying to normalize it. A normalize means I'm trying to make it be consistent from one browser to another browser to another browser. So like box sizing gets on the lines of a normalize because different browsers are going to render that the box sizing differently. So WebKit versus traditional legacy browsers, as well as, but then on the other side, a reset is something that I'm defining that I want to be a part of my toolkit of my UI. So a lot of the patterns that I do is I say I want to control my margins on these guys. So from the beginning, I'm going to do this. And then I may even do it on a paragraph tag. I may also do it on a ordered list and unordered list and ordered list, a definition list if I wanted to add another list of types in here. But you can see that it removed all that padding here. Another one that's really bizarre is on body. It has it too, so I like to do this. Another thing I also like to do as a reset is I like to do WebKit overflow scrolling to touch. This gives it a nice little feel on mobile. So this is pretty much the way I start off every single project. You put your far-reaching ones at the top, so something like a star selector is the most far-reaching. And then you can do, after that, your type selectors. So body's a type selector. These are all type selectors. And then I like to do objects after that. So an object I like to define as O dash to help me identify that these are pieces that are based to the structure. After that, I do C dash, which is component dash. And then after that, I do U dash, which stands for utility or helper. And after that, I will do a T dash, which stands for theme. If I do a underscore and then a class, what that is a hack. The last of all of them is JS dash, which is styles or selectors that aren't really style based, but they're related to your JavaScript. So it's helping you identify which are more functional as opposed to stylistic in your CSS. But anywho, long explanation for what we're doing here. So this is O container. We have margin left, margin right. It has max width and it's centered. Max width allows me to say as it spanned, it's going to go to a max width of 700. Why this is nice is as I get smaller, it scales down and goes like this. If I had this as just width of 700, you'll see that it starts to overflow on the left to right. So you can see that it's not stacking, and this window is actually too wide for this. So it has this overflow on the X, which is not cool. So if I change this max width, it does this. So we have that. Now, if I wanted to do something consistent with gutters, there's a couple patterns that I like to follow here. So on OContainer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say OContainer, and I'm going to say at media screen and min width 700 pixels. And then I'm going to put OContainer inside here. So this is a MediaQuery. This is how you do responsive web. These are features. So there's different various features that you can have in a MediaQuery. And then there are types. And these are the, I guess, conditions that you have for your CSS. You can have multiple types inside here. So I could say like min width of 700 and max width of 900. And yeah, max of 9. So this means between 700 and 900 pixels. We're going to give it an outline of 10 pixels. That's going to be solid and line. So once this goes here, and then you can see right here, for those 200 pixels, it has green around it. So those are two different types in MediaQuery, which is cool. But that's a minorly, a moderate, I guess, complex, I guess a day 2 MediaQuery that you'd be building out. We're going to focus more on the simple one. So what this is saying is a minimum width of 700 pixels. I'm going to give it a margin left and margin right for this guy. So how MediaQueries work, they are wrapping around your CSS selector that you have and its properties. So this is saying anything that's contained inside of this is going to, or anything that's within, anything above 700 pixels is going to get these CSS classes inside here. Anything below that will not get it. So this one you're not going to be able to see really because it says 700 and that's the width here. So max width 700 and max width here. It's above 700 gets centered. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say all right, so I'm going to add padding left and right to give this a gutter on the sides. So once we get to 700, you're going to see this kind of hiccup really quick. So right there, do you see that hiccup right there? That's because we got to 700, and then all of a sudden we've added 40 pixels inside, so the content kind of jumps around. So the proper way of having a seamless interface would be to say, all right, I want my internal gutters to be 20 on both sides. So 20 plus 20 is 40. So my max width is actually 740 and 740. So my max width here is 740, but this is saying when it's above 740, give it a margin left, right of auto. And when it is below 740, give it 20 on each side of padding. So now we have this consistent like look. Oops, you may have seen a hiccup there. That was just a weird load. Let's make this be a little bit more dramatic. Let's make it be 100 pixels on each side. And then that would be 800, or that would actually be 900 pixels. So you can see that as I get bigger here, it never really hiccups. So it does this like consistent flow from small screens to large screens. Now, people argue with me on this pattern, and they're like, well, why don't you just make it be 740 and add the padding on the inside? It doesn't have as much flexibility. For demo purposes, I'm going to make this be a background color of black, and I'm going to make the color be white on the inside. And you'll see this kind of nice flow here. So it's going to be centered there, and then it's going to go here, and then it's going to kind of contain here. So another thing that I can also do should I do this wrong? I just gave the exact opposite of what my argument always is against this. So we're going to create something down here. As I said earlier, I said a T is a theme, so I'm just going to call this T dash, we'll call it 1, just for sake of whatever. T dash 1 is going to be background color. and then this white here. I'm going to wrap this container with this guy. All right, so now I have this kind of look and feel. So it spans the entire width, and then it goes here, which is cool. This can also be broken down into other ways, and what I've done in other projects before is done this. So I have a container, and I have a container wrap. Do this. And I may want to have something like an overflow hidden on this guy, but then I may have a container wrap full and provide two different options for this guy. And the difference between this one and the bottom one is one of them can be, those gutters, and the other one can just be a little bit more fluid and flow on each side. So let me show you this. 700 pixels, so this is cool. Exactly what I want here. And the difference between these two are going to be this 700. Something like that. So now I have the flexibility of both options here. If I wanted to control the padding differently, oops, I missed this. And I actually don't need this. If I wanted to, I could also just keep this on the guy up there without having a MediaQuery, because it's not going to be applicable to anything else. So if I just did this. All right, so here we have two different things. One has a padding and one doesn't. So here you can see it kind of, oops, a weird load. I don't know why that's happening. 700. 740. That looks like that shouldn't be like anything right there. That little, there we go. That was just a CodePen thing. So you can see that this top one has padding and the bottom one doesn't. So if I wanted to control these differently, I could and make it be more flexible. So if I had something like a Uspace, which I use a lot, let's just say left, and we give it our default. We said 20 pixels, and then we also had one that was called right, and we had right, and then we also had top. So we had top, right, and then we'll do bottom. So now what I could do, and here, I could add a wrapper, or I can add it here if I wanted to. Let's do right and left. So now these will kind of behave the same way, but the difference is at the desktop you can see that this is wider. It just always has a gutter inside of it, where that one goes from one side to another. So for me, I use both of these consistently. They have different use cases, and there isn't a right or wrong way, really. It depends on how you want that content to flow. All right, so I see Chuck has to drop off, which is fine. I am going to record this and finish up, and I will share it afterwards. Because now that I did all this review and set this up, we are now going to get into the primary lesson. Chuck, before you head out, or Mitch, do you have any questions about the containers and like what I just showed you there? I know I covered a lot. I even went through the different use cases of a utility class or a helper, as well as a theme class down here, and structurals and widths, and a little bit of responsive, as well as resets and normalizes.
I don't have any questions.
Cool.
I have no questions.
Chuck, you're amazing. No worries. We'll follow up. Call me tomorrow or text me. Let me know if you have any questions, and I can help you out. Okay?
Awesome. Will do.
All right. Thanks, buddy. All right. So, Mitch, now what we're going to do is we're going to open up my favorite website, Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg's actually being interviewed right now. What we're going to do is we're going to make something similar to, let's just start with, let's go to, I'm trying to think. Let's make this guy really quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my view so we can stack this a little bit differently. I do not necessarily like working this way in CodePen, so it may take me a moment to really think this through, but let's do this. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a container width here, and it's going to be the width of whatever this project is. If you actually wanted to make it similar to it, let's do this. Let's figure out how wide this is. All right, so this is 851 pixels. That's cool. And then their gutters here are 10, which is cool. And then on the right, all right, so I'll just look at this. So this is 518, which is awesome. What did I say the outside was? I completely forgot. It was the most arbitrary number of all time.
851?
851, yeah, that's cool. Let's not make it that. Let's call it 850. What we'll do here is we'll do 850 plus the 10 on each side, so that makes it 70. And then we'll do 10 here because their units are in 10. So 870. And Facebook isn't even responsive, so I don't know why I'm even concerned about that. All right, and then this guy was how big? 516. 516, that's cool. I'm going to make myself a note here that says 516, because I will forget. All right, we're going to create two different columns here and build this out. So we're going to start from scratch here. This is going to be not necessarily best practices. It's going to be more of like, hey, let's see how quick we can build out this Facebook page. All right, so we have O container, and then we're going to have O container wrap inside here, which is going to allow me to wrap this inside here. Oops, to give me a max width of that width that we had. I'm going to get rid of this theme for the time being, and for right now, I'm just going to add a style outline just so you can see this right here, and then we'll remove these at the end of what will go inside here. So we're going to have two different columns, so I'm going to call this a class.grid. So it's going to be called O grid. And for purposes of this, I would typically break this out a little bit differently, but for today, what I will do is I'm going to create O grid here. And I'm just going to do a display flex for time's sake. And then I'm going to give a column here as well as a column here. So this will be the right, this will be the left. And we'll see these guys go right there. And then we're going to call this O grid. Cell It's not really like it really matters here because these aren't going to be doing much. And then I'm going to call this a newsfeed. And then on this side, we're going to call this like, what would you call that? I don't know. Yeah. Profile details. And actually, let's call it this. Let's do this. C profile and then C profile details. And we'll say newsfeed. That makes me feel a little bit better. So that's just using BEM. So these are elements of this block. Block is the C profile. Details is the element as well as newsfeed. And we're inside here, and these are flex. And for this, we don't really care if they wrap or not. There's more attributes that we can put inside here, but that's pretty much it. We're going to jump down to an area here, which we'll call C profile. And then we are also going to create C profile newsfeed. And we are also going to create C profile details. I will add a background color here of red so you can see it with the color of white inside of it. And this one is going to be black with line text inside of it. All right, so that's how we're telling the difference. This was 516. That's cool. We're going to give it a width of 516 here. And then, oops, I meant to do that. So there's a width of 516. If I want this to be off to the side, I can say margin left auto, and this will push it away because this is a display flex, which is a cool way of doing this. If I want them to be equal size, I could say something like this, flex 1. So these are going to span the full width here. Should do that. C profile, should be right. Oh, good. Oh, it needs to be on the children here. So if I went like this, these would be the same width with that one. So that's equal down the middle, which we don't want. The other thing that I'm also going to do here is I'm going to add, let's just do this. We'll make this as simple as possible. Let's say margin left 10 pixels. Actually, we'll do margin left auto. So that's what I said I would do. No, we'll do margin left this. How do I want to do this? There's a bunch of ways. We'll do flex here, and then we'll do left. So then it has like that. Again, a million ways of doing this, but this is that width of that container. And now as this grows, they will kind of grow together. So if I put something in here like pay, and I said norm 4000, hit this, you can see that these are growing together, which is cool. But what we're going to do, and this is why we're here, is we're going to say, forget about this other side here. This is just the navigation stuff, or details here, whatever. And we're going to create this little profile here. I'm going to steal the color of Facebook, so I'm just going to use my color picker. Oh, come on. All right, cool. And then I'm going to go to body, and I'm going to say background color. Oops. I'm going to say this. Cool. And then what else do they have here in body? What is their font? Oh, that's great. We'll just steal that. Nice. Oh, look at that. They even have some nice little... Siri, don't do it. I mean, Alexa. Cool. All right, so we have this coming together. I'm going to get rid of this red just because we don't need it anymore. And as I said, this was kind of just... This was more or less just a placeholder. And this container here isn't really needed. Again, I just put that there for sake of demo and showing you this coming together. All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to build out this card on the side. So we are on this right-hand side. As we know that this can grow, we're going to create a C card. And inside C card, it is going to have some details here. So we'll say C card. We're going to give it a background color of white. This is a good start. Get rid of this. And then we're also going to give it a border of what this has here. Where do you have your borders? Oh, good Lord. Good Lord, Facebook. There we go. Cool. And I believe that there's a border radius on there. Yep, border radius. All right. Right now there's no content here, but if I did this, you're going to see this kind of come together here. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is there's going to be a section at the top, so we're going to call it C card intro. Actually, we'll call it header, and then we'll also create one that says footer. And I'm going to create main. And I'm going to put a paragraph inside here. I'm going to say lorem is 40. So far, so good. And then in header, what we're going to do is we're going to have this icon and this text here. How I'm going to build this out is I'm going to create something called oMedia, which is the media object, which is a primary piece of objective-oriented CSS. I'm going to call it asset. And inside asset, I'm going to add an image, and I'm going to add a placeholder image for the time being. Placehold it. And I'm going to say whatever 50 by 50. I'm going to highlight this to see the size of this guy. It's 40 by 40. All right. I'm going to say image here. All right. And then inside here, so we have this image and everything's coming together. We have now these details about me inside here. And I'm going to call this oMedia main. And inside oMedia main, I'm going to add in a title here. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to put in H4. And I'm going to put Kevin Mack. And then underneath there, I'm going to put a span. I'm going to say 12 hours. And I can't see if there's something in between there, but I'll just say span. I'm going to do this. All right. So right now, Kevin Mack's going down there, and there's this UL here. I'm going to do that class that I've talked about before. I like to call it UOnList because it's an override, but it's almost more of a normalized than anything. And UOnList is going to do a reset on this unlist or on this list object. So by default, a list has a padding left of 40 pixels. I'm going to make it be 0. Already in the top and bottom. Margins already reset from before. I'm also going to say list style is none. And that's pretty much it. So now those are aligned next to each other. I'm also going to give this a, how do I want to do this? There's a couple ways. I can say OGrid, but I'm also going to create this as OFlex. And then I'm going to drop OFlex here. And then these are going to be right next to each other. So those are right next to each other. I could also do the media object the same way, but I like to follow more of the media object in a different way, the more traditional approach to it. So what we're going to do is, and just so you know, This is a really famous article. Where is the original one? Yeah, I think this is. So Chris Coyer has this one that's out there. But again, he talks about this, and there's also what's called the flag object and the different ways of doing it. So this is one of the most common CSS attributes that are out there and how to approach it. And yeah, he actually goes through each different ways of doing this. This is pretty cool because he's even updated this to grid. But these are the common ways of doing the media object, flag object, flex object, and you can see like these guys being done that way. That's really cool that he's done that. So anyways, so I'm going to say main and flex here, and I'm going to create these guys. Actually, I want to do this. Oh, geez, I have these in the wrong order. All right, so you can see by default that this guy is, this was longer, so if I put this, there's different ways of looking at this. So if I looked at this, you'll see this wrap around this image. Oops. Why is that not happening? Oh, main. Asset. Is there a typo here? Oh yeah, it is doing it. Do you see how it's wrapping around right here? That should not be happening. To overcome that, I could do overflow hidden here. And you'll see that this is kind of breaking down right here. So it gives me this nice look and feel of this. The reason why I was getting confused is because of this area down here. So if I get rid of that, you can see that these are column next to each other. Why this is a powerful thing is if I make this from 40 pixels to 140 pixels, you'll see that it gets wider and it keeps the columns inside here, which is a very nice thing. And it keeps the consistency of things like this. And then the only other thing that I need to do on this is just say after, and I'm going to clear this float and say content is this, and I'm going to say display table just for old school preferences, and I'm going to say clear both. And that helps me set a height to this. Without this, if I had just this, and I give this a background color of lime, and I got rid of this, you would not see that green. It would stop up here. Come on. Oh, well, I would have to also get rid of this, but I feel like this is a little delayed here because this should not be showing here. But basically, this is the proper way of clearing a float afterwards, and you would see this. I think CodePen sometimes is a little bit slower to update. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. But this is the proper way of doing it. And then we have this guy in here. We have the title right there. What we're also going to do in card is we're going to add these paddings, and I'm going to change this to 10 pixels. And then I'm also going to add something here that's called Uspace. Extend this to all of them. So Uspace is going to have all of these. So now when I add Uspace to card, you can see it has this padding inside here. And then for this guy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say U space left. It's going to be spaced out right there. I'm also going to create something that is called circle. So like U circle. I'm going to say overflow hidden. And I'm going to say radius 50%. And then we're going to add that here. And you can see that that went there. Why did that not cut that off? So this I'm going to also give a couple other things. So I'm going to make U block. Just for sake of this, and I typically make all the different CSS like block styles inside here. So I'll say like inline block, just for the sake of doing this here, and then I'll add these inside here. So that is just another one of those weird things the CSS was not coming through, because by default these are inline block and it renders a little bit weird, so that fixes that. So here we have my name, we have this little space here. The other thing that I'm also going to do is one of my favorite and most common patterns. I like to call this Uspace Children, just because I think that's a cool name. And what Uspace Children is, it says, hey, look at the children underneath, and then say, hey, the next one, let's space it out by the default spacing. So by adding Uspace Children to this parent, I have spacing out in between them. Oops. So what this is saying is Uspace, if we look at it backwards, it says star, which is any selector that follows another selector. So these two list items are next to each other that are direct descendant of Uspace gets spaced 10 pixels. So 10 pixels left for this. So if I added a bunch more to here, they would all be spaced out, which is really cool. And that's why it's called Uspace Children. Another pattern that I also like to do is say Uspace sections. And I just say, so directly, and then the space in between. So this is treated a little bit differently. But what this would be is I add it here, and then you can see the space happen in between those, which is cool. So if I added more sections here, I could do that. They're all spaced out. Without that, they would be all brushed up next to each other. And then sometimes like I do Uspace, like at 2x, and then I may even do at tiny. And I can do half, so 5 pixels, and then 20 pixels. So if I want to say Uspace sections dash half, oh, that's fine. We get this. All right. So finishing this off in the next 5 minutes, we have this. This is the start of this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add in this paragraph. We'll just say this. And we'll add, let's just for shits and giggles, we'll just do keep this as type selector. Cool. And what we'll also do is we'll go back here and say this card, the space, we'll say Uspace sections because we just made that. They're spaced out nice. They're spaced out inside appropriately. And then what I will also do here is I will go up here to my body and do something that I typically do from the start. And I'll say line height 1.5, which will space these out at 1.5, which makes some niceness here. Sometimes it seems a little too aggressive. You can do something like 1.2. But then typically when you're doing a paragraph, I like to do a reset and say line height for legibility 1.5. Cool. Facebook's actually a smaller font size, but that doesn't really matter. We're not going to worry about that. And what we'll actually do is use space sections 2x. So these are spaced out a little bit more. And then lastly, but not least, we would have our like buttons here. For sake of time, I'm going to get rid of those. So we just have this. And then for this, what we'll say is in C card, we'll make it be that color. And let's actually create a theme here. We'll utilize a theme look and feel. So we'll say anything that's a T1, any anchor gets this color, as well as any, yeah. We'll go back to my header here, and we'll make my name be an anchor. Whatever. And I will do a reset also at the top that says, hey, I don't want anchors to have text decoration underlined, so I'm going to say text decoration none. So now those are hidden there. So we have my kind of like start here. The last thing that I want to do as kind of a cleanup is I'm going to say UFS. And typically what I'd use is my methodology that I wrote, which is called object-oriented typography. For my fonts and sizes. So if I go to codepen.com/nice transition or .io nice transition, and I look at my object-oriented typography setup that I have here, and I go into depth in here. I have a few videos online where I talk about this. Basically, I create the small size to the largest size of my interface. So for not going through all of them, I'm just going to make 2 of them and just say, hey, this is going to be my smallest one. And this is going to be a font size of computed 12 pixels. And then we're going to just add that on this guy. And then I would also then add in all the proper colors and everything in between. I could do the little space in between, but basically this is a start of this card. And then what I would have is just multiples of these, so I'm just going to add a bunch of them here. Okay, and again, these are really close to each other, so we're going to just say Uspace sections 2x, if I can spell, and those will be spaced out. Oh, Uspace sections. Oh, let's do one thing. So this is another thing that I do is I say Uspace and then ugut. I create the same things for all of my spacings as I do for margins and paddings. Typically, I'll just go like something like this once I have them set up. And we will just copy this. We will just do a quick little find replace. I'll just do it in Sublime Text. So this, and I'll say, hey, space, and replace with gut. And say, okay, that's cool. And then say padding, all right. And then say margin. And now I have the same things, but with, for margins. So now I can do the same thing. So now I have margins in between here, which are fantastic. I can add a Uspace top here, and I can do a Uspace bottom. And now we have this nice little flowing thing here, which is cool. So that's a really quick like Facebook newsfeed, and I don't need this at 2x, so I'm just going to go back to the 1. And this could be refined a lot more. The cool thing about this, as I said, like I made this as a theme. So I'm going to do one more thing here and go back to this card where I have this. And just say, hey, for T1, I'm going to say card gets this styles. So now if I wanted to change, if I wanted to do like a darker theme, I could do something like this. Let's do an in between. We'll do, let's see. Let's do black around it, and then we'll make this be Let's make it red. Jeez Louise. All right, so now if I wanted one of these to look differently, oops. So I'm going to pick one randomly and just give this a, do this T2. The last thing that I realized is this is actually a different selector I would have to do here. So this now works on the actual one as well as if you wanted to do it as an inherited one. You could definitely do that too. So now if I scroll down, we're going to have that dark one. And then if I wanted all of them to be the same color, I could just update this from where I had that T1 up here and change this to T2. Now all of them are going to be that color. So I am assuming that that was a lot. Mitch, did I lose you anywhere on the road there?
No, I would like that. Just watching a quick mock-up.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and
it's easier to follow than what we were going through previously.
yeah, as I said, like today, like this would be covering a lot of things here, and like you see, like right here, this isn't responsive, but we could easily make this be responsive if I said this. California, here I come. And we'll give it a 3, and we'll say flex wrap. Cool. So now this is going to do something amazing. So you can see that those wrap there. Cool. Who's excited about that? Yeah, but I mean, that's all I have. I think we covered everything that I said I would cover. The only thing I didn't hit on was positioning, which we kind of hit really hard last time. So if I wanted to do something really quick, I could probably just throw that little like button in the corner. If we wanted to do this, we could just say all C cards are position relative, and then if I wanted to just give a little guy here, and I'll just do this. Just call it a button. Put high here, and this button high. So this is the last minute little demo, which is going to be the worst named, but I'm going to say outline out 9 or 0, box shadow 9, display the inline block. So I'm just doing a reset on this, and background color white, and I'll say border 1 pixel solid. This I'll say a height of 40 pixels and a width of 40 pixels. And yeah, so we'll just go back. We'll do the easy way of aligning this. Now we'll say a line height of 40 pixels. All right, so oops. What have I done? What have I done with my life here? Height 40, inline block, that shouldn't matter. What in the world? Font size, 1 round. Oh, padding, there we go, 0. Cool. So now this guy is kind of reset, and it's right here in the middle, but I want it to be up there. For purposes of this, I'm going to say position absolute. Again, I would do like more of a BEM approach to this, and I'll say right 0 and top 0, and now he's going to be up there. So that's a way of doing positioning. If maybe make this a little bit smaller of a height. So now it's up there in the corner, even though it's down here. And if I move this inside this, it would still go up to that top because it is always relative to, or an absolute is always absolute to the nearest relative. If we made this guy right here, say style position relative, it would be inside there. So that's really the last lesson that we didn't cover today. So it's right there. The reason why it's there is this is the nearest relative for this absolute to fit in. And that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah, and if I got rid of, just to preview one more thing, if I got rid of this position relative on C card, it would be way up here. Whoa, there it is. Even though it's inside the DOM structure. So that's the last little lesson. And now we've hit on all of them. All in about an hour.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else?
I was kind of a just random question, but so like, let's say you're like a freelancer or something, and like, how would you convince like a small company that it's better to like have you build a website versus one of those like or one of those software out there?
Do you literally mean me, or like to
no, like someone who knows like HTML and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, so the difference is, so you have to kind of prove yourself to do this. So the reason, like a lot of the work that I do are long-term custom application development and design. And with that, it's the things that I'm designing and developing are around the content itself, not necessarily trying to fit content in the design. So things like Bootstrap, why I have issues with Bootstrap is a great foundation. It's a good platform. It's only a good platform because it's documented. It is a horrible design UI tool because it is so far-reaching and it needs to be able to be used for multiple contexts and multiple content that it's hard to actually create a design unless you're designing with it. So when you're using a platform or using one of those tools that's off the shelf, you have to jam your content into a site, into a structure that wasn't made for the content. So when the web started and I started web development, it was always like, how can we put my content on the web? And then it started being like, how can we design around the content that I put on the web? Fast forward to about 2005, it became, here are all these designs and now how can I jam some content in there? And it became content second. So the biggest argument on why to build custom and to build your own CSS is because you are putting together the correct content and you're designing content first, and you do design structures around the content itself. And things like a Squarespace, which is a tool that out of the box is actually pretty powerful, really great. You're still forcing your content into being something in there. And a lot of the designs that you end up putting together if you are doing custom are, at least in modern design, are less robust, less over the top. They're streamlined to fulfill the needs of legibility for the content. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And there's something I just thought of, but like, so if something like Squarespace like ceases to exist and you built your website off of it, what happens? Like, I guess I've never really used those tools. Like, do they actually give you
they would
code that's like generated, or?
No, so those are all platform-based. So they're all out in cloud. You can develop them locally. So Squarespace, you can pull down similar like how Shopify. But if Squarespace went under, you wouldn't have your code. The only thing that I can really think of that was majorly used that went under was probably like AngelFire, which was in GeoCities many years ago. Those companies are really solid. If they were to go down, or if they had issues, and their runtimes are amazing and they're very quick, but if they were to say crumble or get merged into something else, I imagine that they would give you some time period. I'm sure their terms and conditions say that.
Okay.
But you don't actually own you don't own the code. But I've done customizations inside of really crazy platforms like SharePoint, which is the worst one to do at Squarespace. Definitely done a bunch of times. Shopify, I love to do more than anything. I'm currently working in Tridion SEL, which is cloud-based. I've worked in Sitecore, which is cloud-based, but it's all custom application development. So, and those platforms can't really go under. I mean, they could, but it would be awful. Cool, man. Anything else? And next week, if this recording went well, I'll post it online. And next week we'll you guys will be driving it, and I'll be watching and kind of digging in there. And then, as I said, I'm doing the workshops coming up, and I'm going to continue to do video tutorials like this, but instead of it being something arbitrary like this, it's going to be projects that I'm actually designing and developing right now.
Okay. This thing that we're gonna do next week, is it like something you want us to do beforehand, or is it?
No, we'll do. Yeah, we'll do it together. So it'll be kind of like quizzy, like, hey, what do you think of this? And we'll kind of go from there.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be super fun. So.
The way I code, I like look up stuff every second.
Well, we can do that together. I'll be the person. I'll be your Google search. So. All right.
Okay.
Cool, man. I'm gonna stop this video for one thing, so I don't forget that.